In this video, I want to show you how to prepare and paint an exterior door with Rustoleum. I'm going to demonstrate spraying it with an HVLP gun, as well as rolling and brushing the paint on. For rolling and or brushing the paint on, I'm using a roller frame and an assortment of paintbrush sizes. I have a 2-inch and a 3-inch. For spraying the door, I'm using an HVLP gun, a compressor, some acetone, paint strainers, as well as a measuring cup and a mixing bowl. For either method, I'm using some TSP or degreaser, some paper towels and microfiber towels, a sanding sponge or a sanding block with some sandpaper, some sawhorses, some masking paper along with some masking tape, as well as some general tools to remove all the hardware. While the door can be painted while it's installed, it'll be very difficult to not get runs with the paint because of gravity. So I'm going to completely remove the door. But before I remove the door, I'm going to remove all the hardware that's not necessary to keep it on. So I'm going to remove the blinds, the doorknob, and anything else that might be attached to it. Now with the door still on the hinges, I'm going to spray it with the cleaner and wipe it down. With the door clean, I'm going to take it off the hinges. I'm just going to pull the pin at this point. So now I have the door on some stands. If you have a weather stripping like this, you can just remove it with a pry bar. Not able to remove the pin and the hinges earlier, you can remove it now. At this point, you can set it aside and remember to oil it later. Now I'm going to do one more quick wipe down for areas I might have missed, so like under here or on the sides where it's touching the door jamb. Now if you have glass in your door, a good time to mask it off at this point. If you're painting with the roller or the brush, you don't have to put masking paper on the actual glass as you won't be getting paint on it. You'll just need to use some tape around it. However, if you are spraying, you'll definitely need to cover the glass because you will get overspray on it. Next up, I'm going to take my sanding block and scuff the entire surface of the door. Next up, either blow off or vacuum the dust. Now as one last check to make sure I get any residue, I'm going to wipe it down with some mineral spirits. This isn't required if you thoroughly cleaned it earlier. However, at this point I would strongly suggest wiping it with a microfiber towel anyways just to get any remaining dust. Now it's time to prepare the brushes. So what I'm going to do is just pull out any loose fibers that are in the paintbrush so they don't come off in the paint. For the foam roller, I'm going to wrap tape around it and then pull it back off so any loose debris will come off with the tape. Be careful using very cheap rollers because the tape will pull off part of the sponge. Next step, thoroughly mix up the Rustoleum paint. Make sure to scrape both the sides and the bottom to get any loose debris. You want to thoroughly mix it so there's an even color throughout. Now it's time to start painting. So I'm going to keep the paint on the door just so it's easy to access. I put a paper towel under it so I don't get any scratches on the door or drop any paint. So first thing I'm going to do, is starting with the brush, is to fully immerse it. Get any air bubbles out, so I'm going to push it against the sides. Don't wipe it off like this because you want it fully saturated with the paint. If you do that, you just won't get much paint on it. So I'm going to dip it, make sure it's fully saturated. You can knock it loose to get any big drops of paint, but like this, and then I'm just going to lay it down. It should feel fairly heavy as you're dragging it, as long as there's enough paint. If you do it where there's not enough paint, it'll start sliding very easily, and then you know you need to reload. Paint will spread out, so don't be too worried about any bare areas. So when I run the paintbrush across, it'll be bare here, but the paint will soon run together as it flattens out. So this is how I paint on the flat parts. Where the pen areas is the exact same. I'm just going to get the paintbrush and span it across the panel like this. Make sure I get into the corners. And lightly run the paintbrush across it to get an even spread. As you can see, the oil-based paint likes to run together and create a nice finish. Once I've done a full panel, I'm going to do a finish pass across the whole area. So I'm just going to start at one end like this and very lightly run the paintbrush across. Not putting any pressure on it, it's just getting any excess paint and redistributing it. I'm going to keep on the flat part. And that's all there is to using the paintbrush on the door. You could use this same technique across the entire area. Flats are obviously going to go much faster, but you can still get a mirror finish on these panels. If you needed to take a break while painting, you could just put your paintbrush in a Ziploc baggie. Okay, so quick update. I tried using the foam roller and it created way too many air bubbles. It was thousands of bubbles as I went across, even when I fully saturated it. So I would not suggest using a sponge roller, a cheap one anyways. So then I went and got a higher quality nap roller. This is 3/8 nap, I think. And there's just a lot of texture to it. Here's a texture from the nap roller. Here's the texture from the paintbrush. As you can see, it's very smooth. But this is just way too much texture. I don't think this will fan out enough for it to make a difference. This will dry very orange peely. So I would not suggest finishing with a roller. You can use this to quickly distribute the paint and then use a brush to go across it to get any of the nap texture out of it. So now I'm going to coat the door with the roller and then finish it with a paintbrush to see what kind of finish I could get. For reference again, this is the brushed appearance and this is the rolled on appearance. Okay, so now I'm going to do the finish pass. Once the finish pass is done, you will then need to let this completely dry. And here's the door roughly 3 hours later. It took at least 3 hours for it to dry hard. You don't want to touch this at all before then because you'll leave fingerprints and the paint's still too soft. Dried to a very nice finish on areas where I laid it on heavier. Definitely a lesson learned there. Any areas where it was too light, the texture from the roller still came through. I wasn't able to get those out. So to fix this, I should have put more paint on here. For areas where I put the right amount of paint, there are tiny lines from the paintbrush, but they're only visible if you look very closely and into the light. Other than that, it's a mirror smooth finish. These are areas where I didn't have enough paint. You can see some texture right here from the roller. Also on the corners here, there wasn't enough coverage for the paint. This would be impossible to do in one coat just because of the geometry right here. So after painting this side, I would not suggest using the roller at all. Just using the brush would have fixed all of these problems. I would have a perfect finish other than right here where it would still be showing through. In this case, I would just go do a touch-ups right here with a very light coat to finish it off. Everywhere else I could have gotten away with one coat if I used the brush. Now I'm going to demonstrate how to apply the paint using an HVLP gun. At this point you will need to be wearing a respirator designed for the VOCs as well as some gloves. This specific Rustoleum says it could be thinned with both mineral spirits and acetone. Acetone will flash quicker so it'll be drier faster. If you need to extend the drying time you would use mineral spirits since it's much slower. I'm going to use acetone because I needed this dry quickly today. So the first thing I'm going to do is put pure acetone in here and just run a little bit through it. This is just to clean out any gunk that might be left from the last time you used it. Now that the gun is cleaned out, it's time to mix the paint. So your can of Rustoleum should have recommendations for how much to thin it. Mine does not actually, it just says it can be thinned. I'm going to go 25% acetone, so the remainder will be the paint. The more you thin it, the less coverage you'll get, so you want to be careful here. I'm running out of paint, so I'm going to make mine pretty thin. So first step, stir up the paint if it's not stirred. Next step, I'm going to measure out the acetone. I'm going to mix 8 ounces total, so 25% of that will be the acetone, or 2 ounces. Make sure and wear your eye protection as well. Here's the 2 ounces, so I'm going to put that in the mixing bowl. So I'm going to mix 6 ounces to come up to the 75%. Pour that in the mixing bowl with the acetone. Now thoroughly mix up the paint and the acetone. This should be very thin. Now it's time to pour the paint into the HVLP gun. So get the strainer, hold it right above it. Make sure you're not touching the sides or the paint will transfer across. So now I'm just going to pour it in. At this point the paint is sealed, so you don't need to worry about it evaporating. So now I'm going to clean off my tools. In this case you could just use gasoline since it's really cheap compared to everything else to clean it with. Now it's time to start spraying. So I've set the fan up at the entrance to the garage. I have an air filter in front of it so the paint will get caught in the filter and not get on the fan. Now to start off with, the spray pattern should be fanned out. It should be about 8 inches or so when you're 10 inches away. So when I put the gun right here, I squeeze the trigger. The fan pattern should be about 8 inches on the door. What I'm going to do is pull the trigger before I get to the edge, and it'll be spraying paint just before it hits the edge right here. So you'll get a little bit of paint right here, and then you continue making passes. The reason you don't want to wait until you're already on here to pull the trigger is it'll get a bunch of paint and it'll just be a really thick line right here across. So it needs to be spraying before you actually hit the door. So I'm going to do passes starting from here, and just pick a reference point. I'm going to go to the door right there. If you had a continuous door, it's probably best to do one continuous pass all the way along the length and then go back. I'm going to overlap around 50 to 75% each pass to get full coverage. I have the starting pressure around 30 psi at the gun. For the edge here, I'm going to put the spray pattern so it's narrow so I just don't get paint everywhere. That's fine for this, but make sure and set it back before you get back to the door. So now I'm going to do a couple passes to demonstrate how to spray. I'm going to do the edge first to show you a narrow fan pattern. And here's the door right after spraying it. I kept the coat very light. With spraying, you always want to have multiple light coats versus one or two heavy coats, so it'll flash quickly and give you a better finish. You can see I didn't actually completely cover the entire area. There's some white showing through. So for the first coat, this is perfectly fine and normal. So now I'm going to let this flash off for at least an hour. When I come back, this needs to be already hardened before I put on another coat. Here's an example of the wrinkling that could happen if you put on the second coat too soon. It's not bad. It's so small you can't actually... I might be able to feel it. There's a very, very slight texture. You could get this out with sanding, but again, you want to make sure the first coat is dry so this doesn't happen to begin with. You can't actually see the wrinkling unless you're looking at it at an angle with the light. So not too big of an issue, but you don't want this to happen. Here's the door after the second coat has hardened. If you're able to touch it and it's not sticky, you'll be able to put the door back on now. So now I'm just going to reassemble the door. I'm going to add some grease to the hinges so I don't have to worry about that in the future. Here's the door from the inside, and this is the door from the outside. Thanks for watching.